Those of you who don't know me, my name is Tom Dolan, and we do have a quorum. A quorum equals 6 of us, committee members, and we exceed that. We're going to miss, I already know Fred Doucette won't be able to make it today as a conflict. And I don't know about Representative Wall if that spot will be filled, but we're ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, honorable committee members. We are very thankful for this opportunity to present to you today. My name is Deborah Childs, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for the House. And I'm joined by my peers, other staff members who represent different areas and departments of the commission process. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So we're going to start off with the charge of the committee, and then the staff is going to walk through the commission process. Each of us will, walk through our process for our area, and then we're going to talk about challenges and improvement opportunities that have already been implemented, things that are in progress, and then potentially some recommendations that you can consider. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. So if we may, we ask that you hold your questions to the end unless it's a clarification question. Otherwise, if you have a question, just jot it down because we may answer it throughout the presentation. Then at the end, next steps, we have a couple next steps that we'll talk about what we're doing from a staff perspective, and then each one of you will receive a binder. We have a lot of supporting documentation to some of the points that we're going to bring up today. It's not my binder, Representative Patuchek, but it's a binder with a lot of documentation that will be helpful, including a draft list of all of the statutory commissions. So to start off, just bear with me for a moment because the next 2 slides, I am going to read it because it's very important context for the whole presentation. The first is the problem statement you can see up on the screen. Over the past several decades, there's been an ever-increasing number of legislative committees, commissions, boards, councils, task forces, and working groups. In recent years, more are created each year than are repealed. Some are duplicative, covering overlapping subject matter, even overlapping in their membership, whereas others don't meet or take any action at all. Many have limited to no accountability and therefore do not fulfill their statutory requirements for appointments, deadlines, reporting, etc. There's no consistent methodology when new commissions are created, and the process for creating, appointing, managing, and maintaining them is complex and extremely time-consuming for both legislators and staff. The sheer number of commissions alone prevents legislators and staff from making their way through the process in a timely and efficient manner, and it takes them away from other work, including focusing on the commissions which are active and productive. And then for the committee charge, there is hereby established a special committee on commissions. It shall be the duty of the committee on commissions to consider all matters pertaining to legislative statutory committees, commissions, subcommittees, ad hoc, boards, councils, task forces, and working groups. The committee is to review and evaluate related processes and identify any issues, inconsistencies, root causes, and possible solutions to make improvements, while also helping to decrease the number of statutory commissions overall and going forward. The committee can consider, but not limit themselves to considering, the following. Review commissions which could be consolidated or repealed. Review related processes, administration, and relevant statutes, including reporting requirements. Consider opportunities for accountability and improving enforcement. Improve the standards for writing legislation related to commissions. Consider standardizing the process for reviewing bills related to commissions. Propose enabling legislation to enforce these improvements, and help communicate knowledge and improvements to colleagues and other stakeholders. So that's our problem statement and our committee charge, and we are honored to have the Speaker of the House with us who's going to say a few additional words related to the charge.
Very few. The staff has done such a phenomenal job putting this together. that there's not a heck of a lot I can add to it, except most of you know how much I hate some of these things. And I think it's just a super waste of time, and I know Representative Ebel has been working on this for a long time. We have too many. I think last year we got rid of 22 or 23, and we passed 60 new ones. It just keeps escalating, and it doesn't make any sense. And I know all of you make so much money, you just love to come up here for a commission that doesn't do anything. And we have too many of those that don't do anything, don't meet. We found one that was in existence for a year and a half and hadn't even had the members appointed to it. And then we also found many that, especially on Health and Human Services, that overlapped, that could be combined into one commission. So our goal here is basically what Ms. Childs pointed out to you, is let's see if we can fix this. And I'm confident that we can fix it so that we can have commissions that actually do something and actually put forth a report that means something. And when it comes to legislation, if that's what's requested of it, we have something to go forward with. I think you have a daunting task ahead of you because there is so much that you really need to look over. And, but I would just ask that, let's see if we can help future legislators from going through what we had to go through for too many years now. With that, I'll turn it back to the experts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All right, so now we're going to get into the presentation, starting with the commission process, and each one of us will go through, introduce ourselves, the area that we work with, and then talk about our process.
Good morning. My name is Jim Cianci. I'm House Legal Counsel. My piece of this presentation is to give sort of an overview of RSA 1449, which is the statute which defines legislative study committees and commissions. I'll also talk a little bit about amendments to that statute, which occurred in 2022, which was sort of a first attempt to curtail some of these things. And then also talk about a current bill, which the Senate has passed, Senate Bill 84, which is currently in the House, which may make further changes to the statute. So I think I'll start with talking about a very brief overview of 1449. You can think of it in terms of defining three types of entities, two of which really aren't a problem, but I'll talk about them anyways. The first are what are called chaptered studies. And these are studies which exist only in chapter law. They are not codified in statute, which means that they're temporary. The membership is limited to legislators only. Traditionally, it's usually 3 House, 4 House members, 1 Senate member. You can almost think of them in terms of a subcommittee of a House Standing Committee. They exist only for the biennium. So if they're established in the first year of the biennium, they usually, if they have a reporting deadline of that year, they go away after that first year, or at a maximum, they only exist for the full for the 2 years. And the other important piece is these are staffed by, if they're a House study, they're staffed by House staff. So they're really not an issue because they're very similar to what we already have within the House Standing Committees in terms of structure. The other type of committee, which really isn't an issue, but I want to mention it, is, and there's no real specific term for them, I refer to them as regulatory entities. These are established by statute, and they perform either an administrative or regulatory function, and they have a perpetual term, and they're not established for study purposes. Couple of examples: they could be legislator only, like the Fiscal Committee. GELCAR is another one. There are about, I want to say, 10 to 12 that are legislator only. And obviously those are staffed by the legislature, usually LBA or administrative rules. Thank you. And then there's others that are, I use the Board of Medicine as an example, where they're executive branch and they're staffed by the executive branch. There may be legislators on them, but they're really not a legislative study. And so they're really not an issue as well. And the other important thing is these types of entities usually have very specific rules of procedure because they perform an administrative or regulatory function. So they're almost in many ways like an executive branch agency in that aspect. So what we're really talking about when we're talking about study commissions are everything else. And in terms of definition, they're statutory entities, so they are established in statute for a purpose, for the purpose of studying a specific topic. They may include a term, and they may not. Many of the ones that are currently in statute never established a term. I think of the Committee to Study Exotic Aquatic Weeds as one of those. It's been perpetual for over 20 years because there was never a term established for that. They do include legislators, but usually the majority of the membership are non-legislators, and that can include the chair of the committee. And then in terms of staffing, it's sort of a hybrid. Some are staffed by the legislature, some are not. And you'll hear later about some of the issues that presents. But also in terms of where they meet as well. Some meet in the State House complex, some don't. And so they present a host of challenges due to their nature. So in terms of the 2022 amendments, and Representative Evil obviously knows this because she was a co-sponsor of the bill, it was an attempt to sort of further define these study commissions, provide more structure to them. And so what the amendments did was it first of all, it required the commission term to be specified. So you couldn't leave it no longer open-ended. And then the statutory authorization shall be repealed no later than 5 years after the effective date, unless it was subsequently reauthorized by statute. So in other words, the most you could have would be a 5-year term unless you came in later to reauthorize it. The membership was limited to 15 members total, and which could include non-legislators, but the legislative members had to constitute a majority of the commission. And this was an attempt to curtail there are some study commissions out there with 20 plus members, which may have included only 1 or 2 legislative members. So that specifically addressed that issue. And then also the legislative term members on the commission also was coterminous with their term in office, because there were other issues where you had a member who was no longer a member of the House or Senate who was still on the body, and the question was, were they still allowed to be on that? This sort of tightened that up to say that, no, your term on this study commission is coterminous with your term in office. And we're still we've had sort of offline discussions of how much effect these amendments have had on the new commissions moving forward. And it's still sort of up in the air. I mean, there are attempts we've heard to sort of go around the requirements of the statute, but it's still sort of unclear the effect, and it's only been in effect for about a year anyways. So the new development is Senate Bill 84. This started as a study commission to study, I believe, as a taxation issue, and the Senate essentially amended the entire bill and replaced it with a repeal and reenactment of RSA 1449. And what it would do is it would separate out the two statutes. So 1449 would only define chaptered studies, and then it would enact a new RSA 1449-A relative to study commissions. So you'd have two separate statutes. And what it does is it takes the 15-member limit, which was established last year for study commissions, and then it would apply it to the chaptered studies. I'm not sure the reason for that, because chaptered studies usually only have 5 members or so. So that was, for whatever reason, they took it out of the commission portion and added it to the chaptered study. And so what it would do for the legislative study commissions, it deletes that 15-member limit and also the legislator majority provision as well. But it does add a provision, and this is something that I talked with my colleague in the Senate about. It would require that all commissions shall be administratively attached to the appropriate executive branch agency as determined by the general court. So essentially what it would require is if the legislature were to establish a study commission with outside members, the legislation would also have to specify which executive branch agency would be responsible for that in terms of hosting it, staffing it, and whatnot. That bill did pass the Senate. It is now in possession of legislative administration, and we'll have to see how that goes moving forward. So that's really all I have in terms of the overview on the statute. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the issues with the statute, but that's sort of what I have.
All right, thank you, Jim. I'm Dave Alaconis, the Director of Legislative Services, and as you know, we're kind of the first step in the process of creating these things. Our members come in and start the process. So usually it's almost entirely by email now, which is a bit of a problem in that we've moved to the online and paperless because we have less face-to-face interaction. But that is the nature of where we're moving in society with everything. But while we don't have a true checklist when we're forming commissions, it's kind of built into the system. I don't want to get too inside-y baseball-ish regarding our legislative management system, the software that we use that tracks a bill from beginning to end. But we have, when we're drafting in that system, there are macros. So certain boilerplate language does pop up. We can choose it, and that's generally how it works. If a request is duplicative, we will talk to the requesting member, try to discourage or dissuade. However, it's our experience that when a member of the legislature comes in and requests a commission, that comes in at the very front end of it, and that they've got their mind made up already. So that can create problems because sometimes it's not a boilerplate. You know, we've heard about working groups and task forces and names being changed so that they're not commissions, but they are commissions. And we get names of organizations that are requested to provide a member that sometimes don't even exist. They're a name of, we don't check to see if that organization really exists. It's one thing if it's the BIA or something that's a group that we all know, but there are a lot of very obscure organizations that get membership on some of these commissions. And of course, confidentiality. Everything that is done at OLS until a bill is introduced or until an amendment is put on the table in one of the committee rooms is confidential work between OLS and the requesting member. So while the requesting member may distribute it and talk about the proposal, we really can't do that, and we never know when something is put on the table. And I point out that at this time of year, we're always being asked for certain amendments, and we don't know when you as members put that amendment on the table where it's offered. So we can't answer those requests to provide amendments because we don't know what stage of the process it's in. Now of this year, and now these numbers are a little over a week old, but there were somewhere around 45 bills that create commissions or adjust commissions. And again, the vast majority of those 38 came in as an initial request of the member when we were drafting back in the fall. We have, I believe, 7 that I counted, 7 that were created via an amendment during the process this year. And I'm not saying that these bills that they've gone forward or not. I just did a search of commissions and whether it's an amendment or if it's in the bill is introduced. And there were a number of amendments creating commissions just last week. I know that we drafted, so I don't know what they are, but that number of them were created that way. And that's our process from the beginning. Then it, of course, goes through the rest of the House and the Senate and eventually back to us for enrolling and sending up to the governor. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Smith, Clerk of the House. Again, like Jim, I'm just sort of going to give you an overview of the clerk's office process for now, and then we'll sort of talk about more of the nitty-gritty, dirty details later. So the clerk's office is responsible for the review of all House bills and determining if there is a statutory study committee or commission that has been established by our bills. This review has historically been a combing through of all the legislation as it becomes chaptered law. Because as Dave said, we often, even though a bill might not have been drafted as a committee or commission, it may have been turned into one. And this is something that we often find, that if a sponsor doesn't feel like he or she may have the votes, then let's turn it into a study and we can study it and then we can introduce a bill in the second year. But I would also remind you that our House rules do prohibit that. That if a bill is made subject of a study in the first year, it does have to require a rules suspension or going through rules committee to introduce separately. And that is something that has historically been sort of upsetting to some folks. Anyway, so the painstaking process begins of compiling the information while actively identifying the appropriate contact person or persons for the notification of their appointment. And as Dave said, I do want to stress that this can sometimes be a difficult task, as members may have misidentified organization during the bill's drafting, or in some cases, i.e. in the naming of somebody like the Seabrook Power Plant, where a local designee could not readily be appointed due to lack of information. Fortunately, a month or two after that, the lobbyist contacted us who represented that organization, and we were able to finally work on who to identify. In some instances, members who have shepherded commissions through the lawmaking process may be overeager to have folks appointed before the law has even been signed by the governor. Our former member from Stratham was notorious for that. So while the process of communication is happening with external forces, it is also happening internally as well. The Speaker's office, the Senate President's office, and the Governor's office are all notified. And in your binders later, you will see a sample notification email that goes out from my office. So we create the committee or commission in our legislative management suite that powers all of the data that's available on the website. We take the contact information and are mindful of the term length if stipulated, and sort according to the position in which they are enumerated in the legislation. I often do hear from the first name member inquiring if a quorum has yet to be appointed. If less than a quorum has not been appointed, it's not legal to call a meeting. If a quorum has been appointed, the first name member may schedule the meeting. That being said, a quorum must be present to make the meeting and any actions thereat legal. Lastly, pursuant to the changes made in RSA 1449 last year, the clerks of the respective bodies shall then send a copy of the report to the standing committee of each body with jurisdiction over the subject matter. And again, I would just mention too that oftentimes you do have bills that did not start out as studies that have been turned into studies, and those are harder to keep track of. But we have sort of identified, and we'll talk about this a little more later, some of those internal workings to help that process.
Thank you. All right, the next part in the process is the appointing authority chooses appointees for each of the commissions. And again, I'm Deborah. I work for the Speaker of the House, so the Speaker has to make appointments to the commissions. Now, I have my own spreadsheet, and most appointing authorities have their own spreadsheet, which lists all of the commissions, and we sort that by term end date, because when a term is ending, we need to know the next appointment is due. And then I also if I can lift this, have my binder.
No props.
This is, uh-oh. So these are all of the statutory commissions. As you can see in the photo on the slide deck, I have two other binders because one of them is for other committees and commissions, like our policy committees, committees created by executive orders by the governor, ad hocs, and all of those. These are statutory committees alone. And so if a new commission is created, there's a little bit of a separate process, and I have a binder to keep those in. So if we pass 65 in a year, we don't yet have the RSA, and so I keep them in a separate file. But to be notified of a new commission, I can get this from various methods and ways. I may have one of the clerk's office inform me that there's a new commission. I may have a member because they have interest in the commission. I may hear it on the news that a new commission was created. So I work to collect all those new commissions so the speaker can make his appointments. Then I review the RSA, the RSA, specifically the commission requirements, because lots of times they have requirements. You have to appoint, the speaker has to appoint maybe 2 members who are on the Judiciary Committee, for example, one who's on criminal justice, perhaps one from the minority and one from the majority. So there's a lot of specific requirements, and that's why I have my binder, which I have my spreadsheet, and then this supports that. This is all sorted by RSA, so I can flip to the RSA and make sure the speaker is well informed of what the requirements are. And then also in this binder, I have notes, because lots of times there's back and forth in this process. I may have recommendations from chairs, or the speaker may ask that I follow up with the member to make sure they have interest, expertise, and the capacity to be able to take on the position. It's not just, we have 400 members, so just appoint someone. It's a process. We want to make sure we appoint the right people to each committee. So then the speaker makes the decision, and then I send out an appointment notice and I update my spreadsheet. Other parts of the process that the speaker's office follows is we approve mileage for committee members to go to the state department, the particular state department, or to the state house. And then also, generally at the end of the year, the speaker receives a copy of the reports, interim reports and final reports that come out of these commissions. And that presumably is my role here. However, I do receive a lot of commission questions, and then meeting with every other department here, we receive a lot of the same questions. And a lot of it is because of the sheer number and the confusion from the sheer number. So we receive a lot of the same questions that takes up a lot of staff time and legislator time as well. But that's pretty much my process, and moving on to the next.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ann Fitzgerald, and I'm the Director of House Committee Services. And it is our office who supports these study commissions administratively and also with research staff. And I have a lot to say, but I'll do it on the second round. The first round, I'm just going to go over our process, as everyone has been doing, just to give you a quick overview. So once the first named member is named, they will hopefully come to us to schedule their organization meeting. But one of the things we have to do is constantly monitor, as Representative Dolan did this morning, we have to keep monitoring to see on the webpage if a quorum has been achieved yet. And that can take time. And we've had some members who want us to monitor it regularly, but we don't have the staff to do that. So we have to achieve that before we can schedule their organizational meeting. We also have an instruction sheet that explains to the first name what their role is and what they need to do to make that meeting happen, and to move forward what the chair needs to do. The committee assistants support these commissions clerically. We don't take minutes, but we, as I mentioned, schedule the meetings, maintain the files, and we type their minutes for them if they're handwritten. The researchers who staff the commissions usually, or they monitor them if they're staffed by an agency, it's usually wherever the bill originated in the House, whatever committee that came out of, the researcher who's assigned to that standing committee usually takes on the study commission as well. And the chair is elected at the first meeting, again, if the quorum exists, and we start working with the chair. After that, the chair will appoint a clerk. And then we also we assist with preparation of the final report, and is distributed by the administrative staff. And we have final report template as well as a letter of transmittal. We have samples of that in the binder that you will be receiving later. Our staff has been staffing these since the 70s, and we've worked very closely with Representative Ebel for the last three studies, right? Last three. And so we know what the numbers are, obviously. And as Deborah's mentioned, we get questions that every other office gets as well. And members keep going from office to office seeking advice because sometimes they had nothing to do with the study to begin with. One member proposed it and a member accepts it, and then they're scrambling to try and find out, how do I make this happen? So I can go into more detail in our second round. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to move on to challenges and improvement opportunities.
Paul and I are going to cover this together because many of our issues tend to overlap. I guess the first thing I really want to point out with these, in addition to everything you've heard so far, is these statutory study commissions. They're creatures of statute. And so there's a general lack of guidance and accountability in the absence of any specific statutory provision. And you can contrast that with, say, a chaptered study or or even a House Standing Committee. We have House rules. We have the Speaker as the presiding officer, who has sort of general administrative authority over the body. These, if the statute doesn't specify something like, say, an appointment term or how to replace a member or remove a member, there's really no guidance compared to, say, our House committees. And so that presents problems. It gives rise to many of the questions that Deborah gets, that Paul gets, that we all get, and trying to sort of sort out how to handle a situation that arises. And so having said that, the clearest guidance for these groups is the requirements of the Right to Know law, RSA 91A. That's sort of the bedrock of what they do have to follow. These are clearly public bodies because they've been established by statute. And so they have to meet both requirements of the law. They have to abide by open meetings requirements, which means that they have to notice their meetings and they have to hold them open for the public. And then they also have to maintain public records. That is, they have to keep minutes. They have to keep a file available for inspection in case somebody wants to view the materials. And then they also usually file a report. The problem is, particularly with these commissions, that where the chair is an outside member and where there's not a clear connection with the legislature, they don't necessarily know that they have to follow these rules. And so the questions that arise tend to come back through the legislator who's maybe serving on one of these and says, oh, well, we heard we have to take minutes now, and which wouldn't be an issue for, say, a House committee. We know we have to take minutes because it's in our rules. And so I think that gives rise to many of the questions that we tend to get. And I know Paul's got some specific examples on those.
So just to Jim's point about a couple of things. So it is important that we yes, this is a special committee on commissions, but we do need to talk about the committees as well, because this whole statute is about committees and commissions. And so this really does speak across purposes. So in several instances over the past couple of years, there have actually been at least 3 bills where part of the charge was to review the rules of the House of Representatives to identify what changes are required to authorize certain things. And it's important to note here, in terms of the lack of guidance and accountability, why would you appoint a senator to a House study about House rules? That's just, it reeks of impropriety. I mean, the Senate has a fundamental lack of rules where ours are very specific about certain things, and they don't have a guiding secondary source like we have Masons. They don't have that. So again, there's certain things here that we do have to consider. Additionally, want to go back a little bit. During the committee of conference process, I have to review all of the reports to see if committees or commissions are appointed in those reports that exceed the reporting deadlines established by our own House rules and statute, because in those instances, that requires a 2/3 approval of the committee of conference report because it is tantamount to a rule suspension. Regarding a question regarding the change to 1449, because this is a new change for this year, is requiring the chairs to get the reports. So the answer in some of those instances is pretty easy to determine because of where the bill may have come from. However, this is an issue. I cite an example because I've been here a long time, but we've had over the years construction and demolition debris and how it's disposed of. Now, in our body, we have earth, air, and water. Resources gets water, environment gets earth, and science gets air. Construction and demolition debris has historically gone to two committees, environment and science. So in those instances, who's getting the reports? Are we giving them to both? So those are some specifics that are sort of coming up. Back to the legal issue, again, if less than a quorum has not been appointed, it's not legal to have that meeting. And when we come to notice, where do we notice specifically those commissions that are created legislatively but have no legislative members? Because we have several of those. We don't take charge of them. So in terms of posting, are we responsible at all for keeping track of those things? I argue no. And do we have to make sure that the agencies are posting those things on their own websites or keeping track of minutes and those sorts of things? So to those first 2 points, regarding the right to know and the lack of guidance, those are things where we are speaking across the same purpose here.
And I think the other issue that I'd add, and I term it committee governance issues, and I sort of hinted at this, these are largely the issues that the questions Deborah gets in terms of appointment terms or reappointment, or a committee needs to reorganize and elect a new chair. Again, if the statute doesn't specify how that is done, it's really an open question. There's not a lot of guiding law on this beyond sort of general principles of law. And so versus, say, our standing committees or a chaptered study or a strictly statutory regulatory committee. And so that's why in terms of Senate Bill 84, I think we could debate the issue of potential administrative attachment. That would certainly clarify it because it would take it out of our purview. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily resolve the underlying issues of governance if it's not clarified in statute. So I guess in terms of these commissions, that from a legal perspective, that's my biggest concern with these, is that the lack of legal guidance absent statutory specification.
Additionally, in following up with Jim here, if a commission is created, one suggestion regarding tying SB 84's language and cleaning this up, because I will tell you from my own perspective, I think that SB 84 doesn't quite get where everything needs to be. And I think that my opinion is that it's best to probably retain that this year in legislative administration so that it can be worked on for the fall. But one of those suggestions could be regarding the contents of the commission's work that Jim's talking about and what the said repository for that work should be and where it should be and that sort of thing. That can all be clarified. For those committees and commissions that are existing past the term, the concerns about reorganization that Jim brought up are very, very much true, because what happens a lot of times is, say we've had a commission that has been on the books since 1977 and has met, and it has been in absence during COVID, and they're coming back together. However, in 2017, they did elect a new chair, and that chair appointed a clerk, and they just haven't met because of COVID or whatever. The situation is that if you get a new member of the House who has been appointed, and that member then says, I'm calling this commission meeting and we're going to, the first organizational meeting is to elect a new chair, but you have a chair. So these are questions, legal questions that are existing, and I do think we do need to talk about that. I do think that I think the Senate lacks an understanding of the committee, the committee process in the adoption of their amendment to SB 84. The change that they made of turning a study committee, a chaptered study committee, into a 15-person committee makes absolutely no sense, especially because the Senate always amends our study committee bills to putting one of them on, and we often struggle to get 4 or 5 House members who want to be on a study. So upping that to 15, I think is I think they were trying to make the switch from commission, but that they clearly got it wrong there. The point of legislative commissions being capped last session that we've talked about was because of the influence of those outside the general court, driving policy versus the members driving policy. And the fundamental belief of the House and the Senate last term was that legislators should be the ones focusing on adopting legislation and driving the policy. And I think that that's a very real issue. The one area of SB 84 that I think is right specifically is the administrative attachment to the agency. However, I do think that the individual bills should be drafted with which agency they should be attached to, so that the first named member who is trying to call the meeting is not calling around to an agency that can host versus an agency that shall host. And additionally, I do think there is one additional point that we have to talk about, and that is what's going to happen if we are now appointing all these things and these agencies say, well, this is going to cost you some dough. Because I will tell you, we a few years ago broke the mold with commissions. We spent $500,000 on a commission. Now, I'm not going to get into the details. It's not my point. But the point is that we appropriated $500,000 to run a commission that was not housed here. And that might become the norm if we sort of go back to the old model of commissions and potentially consider this. So I just mentioned that as a point that it should be thought about for what could happen. Going into the system maintenance, I do want to address this because this is where I get a lot of calls. Administratively, the system, when you go onto our website and look up a commission or committee, it's sometimes static, because commissions, especially with commissions that meet infrequently or have never been sunset that maybe should have been, specifically when commissioners are named for certain agencies as being members, we might never hear back after the first 2 years of a commission. And commissioners either have 4 or 5 year terms, and if we don't get a notification that there's been a change, there's not enough time to have somebody live in the statutory commissions page and on our staff, either in committee services or my staff, that literally just spends all their time looking and seeing who's been updated in terms of which agency. So that is something. Additionally, appointing authorities often send folks along because their appointment isn't there that day. That person doesn't get to vote. That person is not a member of the commission or the committee. So it's important to know that the named person is the person. And we don't just have alternates. Sometimes people like to throw alternates at us, but the fact of the matter is, if the statute says there are alternates, then there can be alternates. If it doesn't, that doesn't fly. And that alternate doesn't just get to vote. So that is, you can't just sub a player for the day. So lastly, to sort of conclude, the passage of 1269 last session helped a great deal in terms of commissions and committees. Thank you to Representative Ebel and the staff that was working so hard on that. Some further modifications that we've already talked about might make it stronger. I think SB 84 in its current iteration needs more work. Additionally, staff has already begun to identify a few issues to help better identify committees and commissions in their infancy. Culturally, though, and this is where I'm going to sort of throw some salt. Culturally, I'm not sure we can change the perspective of some that studying issues is already within the purview of our standing committees. I want to say that again. All of you are on standing committees, and every one of your standing committees can study the issues, because every standing committee has a description in House rules about what that committee can discuss. And it doesn't mean that you just have to hear bills on those things. You can have ad hoc meetings, you can have specific subject matter discussions, and even bring about legislation. So I do think it's important that you remember that, and that you encourage members to talk with their chairs about these issues. We just had a new special committee created today to address issues going on in the family court. So there's a special committee that's been formed just for that purpose. So, I mean, we have 3 other special committees this year, one of which is yours, that are specific to serious issues. So those are important avenues as well. So I don't know if we can change that culture, but it would be good. I would also just mention too that you know, just because turning something into a study committee or a commission might boost your pass-fail statistics in getting which legislation was signed into law and that kind of thing. I don't know if that really is the best use of our resources. I know I and the rest of the staff are here to assist you in this endeavor the best we can, but I also know that there are sometimes political considerations as well that we stay away from. A specific issue was earlier last month, there was a bill that was being debated on the House floor to create a study commission that was going to study the exact same thing that's already being studied by another commission. And unfortunately, it did sort of turn into a political issue, even though it was about a commission that's already studying a topic. So again, there is this cultural thing that we have to think about when we're invested.
Thank you, Paul. I touched on most of the challenges that we have at OLS on the first part of my presentation. And just to recap, the commissions do follow a certain process through OLS. We have to maintain confidentiality with our members. Deadlines are a concern for us. Sometimes we don't have enough information for a bill, and it comes down to the last minute, and then the member will request a commission to be established. And again, in the end, we do what the member asks us to do. Now, that being said, internally, we have made some changes at OLS already, largely to allow the clerk's offices, both the House and Senate, to get information earlier. We are working with IT to be able to get reports and information shared easier amongst the different offices here in the state and the legislature. And we'll continue to do that. The other thing that we are looking at in OLS is to have more of a communications effort as we start looking at filing period for next year, because that's on our planning table right now, of how we taking some of the things from this year and learning from them and moving forward. And one part of that will certainly be a discussion about commissions and the research opportunities that you have with OLS. OLS has a 4-member research staff that can conduct research for any individual member. As House members, House Committee Services and Research provides research at a committee level, but at OLS, we provide that research for any member of the House and Senate. And many times, we know that the information that is in the end gleaned by a commission could have been obtained just by coming to OLS research and getting the information beforehand. And that request had not been made. So maybe a better marketing effort for our staff is, well, it is a better marketing effort that we will be doing here as we move forward. And lastly, notwithstanding, we can make changes to 1449 to make it seem lock solid, but all we have to do is have the member say, insert notwithstanding 1449, and then that commission can be anything the member requests it to be, with any number of appointees, members, rules or not. That's something to keep in mind, and that's an easy way to avoid some of the safeguards that we are hoping will put in place.
Thank you. All right, so moving on to the appointing authority. And I said previously that I work for the Speaker of the House, but I also consulted with the Senate, and they follow a similar process and have similar challenges. So I'm also speaking for the Senate when I speak today. But keep in mind, there are a lot of appointing authorities. There may be nonprofits, the governor, and various state departments as well. So they all have their own process as well. There's a lot of people impacted by this. The biggest challenge for me is that there is no one consistent list of commissions. We all have our own spreadsheet, or however others track it. One of those reasons is I track all of the speaker's appointments. So it's not just statutory commissions, but it's standing committees, any type of committee, committees from executive order from the governor, even for organizations like CSG and NCSL, he has those appointments as well. So I track those in my spreadsheet. And then I also track information that others may not care about, the clerk wouldn't care about, or OLS, or even House Committee Services. So that's why I have my own spreadsheet right now. Now, the stars on the slides as we've been going through are areas where we have made some improvements and we're looking to make more improvements. So this is one big area where we're looking to share the data because that's one thing that's extremely time consuming. Next bullet, and I apologize for the text-heavy slides here, but I wanted to make sure that all these issues were documented. So if you forget what I say at the end, you'll at least have them bulleted for you. So next bullet is commissions may be duplicative. And I think all of us have spoke to this a little bit. They're overlapping in subject matter and in membership. We have I want to say a small number. We have 400 House members, but there are very few that actually serve on the commission. So we have some representatives that serve on multiple commissions, obviously. And then when it comes to the Senate, they only have 24 members to choose from. So it's a struggle from that end too. Next bullet, policy committee chairs may lose authority and insight on subject matter. And Clerk Smith talked about this. So this is as opposed to a subcommittee or ad hoc committee. This new commission is being created. Chairs of standing committees may not even have any insight at all. I mean, hopefully there's some communication, but just the sheer volume of commissions that we have, it's unlikely that chairs are getting all of that information back to them. So I feel like they're losing certainly authority and insight and awareness on some of the things that are being discussed during these commission meetings. The large majority of appointments are needed at the same time at the new biennium. And I mentioned before that I have my spreadsheet and I track it by term end date, but more than 90% of those all are appointed at the beginning of a new term. So first of all, as you all know, at the beginning of a new term, we have to have a speaker election. We can't start making appointments until we have a speaker. Speaker needs to make the appointments. Also, largely, the commissions require members who serve on a certain policy standing committee. So, a member of judiciary, a member of children and family. So obviously, after a new term, we have to have all of those appointments made to the policy committees first. As everybody in this room knows, it's also a very busy time. We have a lot of other things that we're doing in December after the speaker is elected, after you're put on your policy committees. We're doing seating, we're doing parking. There's a lot of work that's going on. So staff and legislators, and of course the speaker, has competing priorities. So we're trying to meet the dates of making these appointments, but it's not always easy. Another struggle with them being needed at the same time as others are involved in the appointment process. So some that say, it requires a speaker appointment, it also requires an appointment from the minority office. So sometimes we have to wait to hear from another office, regardless of who's in the majority or minority. And then if there are a few commissions that require joint appointments. So it may be the speaker, the Senate president, and the minority leader from each of the Senate and the House as well. It can be very time consuming to find the right appointee. So appointee requirements may be too specific. I've already mentioned most of the commissions require you be on a particular policy committee, but there are other specifics as well. One example was a breastfeeding mother. Now, at the time the legislator wrote that particular legislation to create that commission, they may have had somebody in mind and a reason for putting, for example, a breastfeeding mother as a required appointment by the speaker. But as time goes on, it may be less, it's a little bit of an awkward appointment for a Speaker of the House or a Senate President to make. Perhaps you can consider, instead of being so specific on the appointments, instead reach out to nonprofits or have, breastfeeding mothers give testimony in front of the commission. There's a high member turnover each biennium, and it's challenging with 400 members for the speaker or even the minority and majority leaders to be able to get to know your members when we're replacing 100 each term. They all have different skills, different talents, different interests, and different availability. Many members are unable to serve, even sponsors. I have had people who sponsored legislation, so a new commission is going to be created, and they say, I do not want to be appointed to this, do not appoint me to this commission. Members change their mind about serving or can't serve. Maybe their circumstances change, health reasons, job, or whatever. So we've made appointments, and then they come back and say, I'm sorry, I can't serve. And that's why some of you who receive my appointment notices get multiple, and I apologize. But it starts the process over when somebody can't serve. Few members serving impacts us greatly. And by few members, I mentioned we have 400 House members, for example, but it's a small percentage of those who actually serve on the commissions. So when we lose them, it's a great loss in many ways. Representative Barbara Shaw served on 11 commissions. Representative Dave Danielson also served on approximately 11 commissions. So when they passed away last term, not only are we dealing with the loss of a loved one, a fellow colleague of yours, we also have to fill their place on their commissions. And then, of course, resignation. Somebody leaves the House, same situation. So it impacts us in many ways when you have a small number of legislators who are serving on multiple commissions. The large number of commissions takes significant member and staff time. It just, just the sheer volume of them and what we have to do for tracking and managing them and the number of questions we get on them. Inconsistent adherence to RSA for appointments. So we may have too many or too few appointees. When I took over this job about 2 years ago, I would find commissions where the speaker was supposed to make 2 appointees and there were four appointees made, including creating alternates when alternates weren't part of the RSA. So it's tough because there's some lack of accountability there in tracking these things. I gave here on the slide deck as an example, LYAC, the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. This is one for a few terms people were making appointments just to try to get the numbers up on this. So there were people who were serving longer than they were supposed to be serving. We had more members than we were supposed to have. And so the cleanup process, I'd be embarrassed to share how much time it took to get that straightened out. And then is just one challenge is I mentioned before that the speaker makes appointments, but lots of times it will say in consultation with the minority or the minority leader has an appointment. So when I started 2 years ago, I noticed there were a lot of, this is not partisan at all, but Republicans weren't appointed. Now, was the process for the Republicans who were in the minority at the time to look through the commissions to make their appointments, or is it the role of the Speaker's office? I reach out to the minority when there are appointments to be made. That's a part of the process I put in place, but it can be very inconsistent, and having a standard process will help us. You'll see there's a star next to that one because that one was one that was important to me. Quorum requirements, a few of the staffers here have talked about this. So from a appointing authority perspective, I have many people coming to me, members, other staffers, the Senate, and I go to the Senate sometimes saying, look, the chair wants to get this meeting going, but they don't have enough appointees. So sometimes I work with the speaker. He may have 3 appointments to make, but we only have 1 member. We like to wait until we have all the members so I can send out 1 appointment notice, but they need a quorum to be able to meet. So if we have 1 member, I'll send out an appointment notice for that 1 member, and then until we get the others. So that obviously is time consuming in the tracking and the appointment notices getting out. But it's important for those commissions that need their members appointed as soon as possible. Next bullet, updating data in the legislative management system tool is manual. The data isn't current and it results in many questions. So legislative management tool, this is basically our website. If you go to the website and search on the RSA, search on the different commissions, people will come to me and say, hey, there's a rep here listed, they're appointed, but this member hasn't been a rep in 2 years. So the process right now is the clerk's offices will make updates when they hear of an update. But if they're not getting appointments made, then the website will be outdated. And of course, this is a challenge at the end of a term when it's outdated once the new legislature is sworn in. Even if you're serving on a commission, because it's coterminous with your term in office, you have to wait for the next appointment notice to come out. So it's very challenging to keep that website updated. Another reason why many of us keep our own spreadsheets. Accountability is lacking. I've touched on this in a couple other bullets, but some commissions don't meet. There's no indication if action is required from the reports. You know, I mentioned that generally at the end of a year, interim and final reports are sent to the Senate President, to the Speaker of the House, to the Governor, and others. It's not clear if action is required. The Speaker will review some that he can, but a lot of these reports are extremely thick, and he can't read through all of these, especially when they're coming from hundreds of commissions. And then there's previously no governance to repeal commissions. So we have commissions sitting around for some time with no sunset. This is my last slide. Bill text for new commissions is inconsistent. So and again, this has been, some areas of this have been fixed going forward, so it won't be as much of a problem, but no sunset date. Some mention that there's mileage reimbursement for legislators, others do not. Some mention a first named or a chair. Some don't mention election of a chair at all. There are lengthy commission names, which is extremely challenging. I'm sure some of you, when you enter the office and see the screen where it shows the meetings of the day, there will be one commission that has a name that takes up the full screen. That's how long the commission names are. And then unclear terms, and by this I mean, you know, we've spoke to this, but your term on the commission may be coterminous with your term in office, but others aren't as clear. Some will say that as long as you're still a legislator, you can serve until another person is appointed. And then some are a little bit confusing and don't have any guidelines around how long the term is at all. And that's when I consult my friend, Jim Cianci over here. Identifying new commissions is not easy or consistent. As I mentioned when I was talking about the process, I'm sometimes notified by the clerks, I'm notified by another member, I'm notified by a State Department who says I need this appointment made, I'm notified by the news and by searching RSAs. So when we staff started meeting, I came to learn that all of us searched through the RSAs to find out if commissions or boards or committees are created. And it's literally searching on that text, looking if there's a board, advisory council. And that's extremely time consuming. And it may sound silly, but that was the way that we were finding all of the commissions. And if you take into consideration HB2 last year, it was in the double digits, the number of commissions that were created in HB2 alone. Now, my friends in both clerks' offices are going to notify me, so I won't be searching RSAs anymore. Next bullet, legislation has meeting or report deadlines that may be unattainable, very difficult to meet. So a new bill comes in, by the time it's signed by the governor and then gets on my desk, it already may be too late. We haven't even made appointments to the commission yet, and they were supposed to meet last month. Lots of times the meetings or final reports are in, November or December, but there have been a couple that were like October 15th, and I'm making the appointment on November 1. And then after a new term, new commissions have just started, so they lose momentum. So we create a new commission, the appointment gets out, they start meeting in November, and now there's an election. And some of the legislators may be here for the next term, some may not, but either way, it makes it challenging and confusing when I send out a new appointment notice and somebody's like, we just had our election for a chair. And now I will turn it over to my friend Anne.
Thanks, Deborah. So when we come, everything that's been shared by the entire staff panel, House Community Services agrees with every single thing, and practically everything was brought up. I was going to emphasize as well, and how it impacts our staff, because we are the ones who end up sitting in these commissions or committees throughout their term, whether it's July to December or a couple of years. For the most part, we are the ones who sit there with them, and we deal with the outside membership that doesn't understand the legislative culture or how the legislative staff functions. My first bullet, I put up, we have the numerous new committees and commissions. So while we're just working with the previous ones, all of a sudden we get a new slate of them, and we have to start all over again with these new ones and add them on top of the old ones. Sometimes we have commissions, as Paul mentioned, they're already in existence. They're already working on issues, and a member has brought in a new bill, and the commission was passed and is studying the exact same thing. So we staff have to sit and explain to the new membership, yes, you're brand new, but this already exists, and you might want to contact the previous commission or the existing commission, see how much work they've done. We had this process several years ago when we had six commissions at the same time on DCYF, and the head of DCYF had to attend one time. All 6 commissions were meeting the exact same week, and he spent all this time here at meetings telling each group what he was doing. So it's very frustrating for staff to see that happening. And so when you add the new committees and commissions, we do go through legislation, as everyone mentioned. We all have to search everywhere to find these items. We did in 2010, or it started I think in 2009, that was our first major search, and we had all staff involved. We had legislation. It was a precursor to Representative Ebel's studies. It was Representative Lori Harding was in charge, and all of OLS, our entire office, the Senate staff, we searched everything. It came up with a master list of all the existing commissions, and we thought this was the end all be all, and then 10 years later we were back at the same things because they grow. And as we've mentioned, we come up with plans and ideas. In fact, it's not in a binder, although I do love binders, but this expandable file holds all of the staff recommendations that we've had over the years on how to help curb these. And we do okay for a year or two, and then we're back to the same situation because members figure out how to bring in new legislation. So for instance, a new bill, a Senate bill I just spotted on Friday, actually, as we mentioned, when we amended 14, you amended 1449 last year, and we came up with the 15-member commission. And we also, and Paul, it's limited outside, correct? Is that, okay, so what the legislation says now is within the, where we used to say a member of the BIA, will now say, it directs the BIA and say New Hampshire Auto Dealers and another group, they're to get together and come up with one person to represent them. So that's the way, but how will the clerk's office write to all those entities and explain to them, this is what you have to do? So that's a new workaround. So every time we go over here, there's another way they figure around it. So that's how we get to all these numerous new committees and commissions. And then my next bullet point, commissions have large memberships. One of the biggest challenges we ever had was when a 45-member commission was created. We tried to square the rooms around. There was no way we could house a 45-member commission here. So luckily we found a place at Seacoast, and that's where they met. And we had a member who was very active with House Community Services. So we were able to meet, it was all outside people, regional planning groups. I think we had 1 or 2 members on it. So we worked with all the regional planning groups, and they actually came and met with us, and we instructed them on the legislative process and what to do. But you can imagine that's taking our time away from working with other committees. And Deborah emphasized, my next bullet is that it takes a long time to make all of the appointments. So, and not all entities want to be on a commission. In one instance, we had a member who kept bugging us, or not bugging us, asking us, please, please, please. They wanted us to call all the organizations to find out why they hadn't appointed anyone. Well, that takes a great deal of time, but in one instance, we did make some calls, and the organization said, we don't want to be active in this study. We want nothing to do with this study. And we told the member, and the member said, well, they have to. And the organization said, we're not appointing anybody. So we couldn't make a quorum. And then again, sometimes by the time the quorum has been met, and this has happened, not only is it past the effective date, but sometimes we have not made a quorum until the reporting week, until November 1, or in one case, over the last 2 years, the committee sat vacant for 18 months. They could not meet a quorum because they could not find anybody who was willing to sit on the commission. The non-legislative chairs and non-legislative members, it can often be difficult because, as I mentioned earlier, they don't understand the culture of the legislative process. Other than right to know, they have no rules to follow. They don't have the speaker. The chief of staff is not here. And we can have some very unique individuals who have expectations of staff that we are there to solely serve that one commission. And we need to explain that we not only do we have our standing committee work, but we have to be available for other commissions and other chaptered studies. And especially, as you all know, you have, again, a 21-member commission, well, in the old days, but who knows what will change. And then you have only 1 or 2 legislators on it, and the other 19 people you're working for, even the chairman, is not a member of the legislature. And sometimes it's a senator the House staff is working for. So this can, and then the continuity that Deborah mentioned, that can also happen, particularly on the long-term study timeline issues, my last bullet. So what happens is, and she was wonderful, Representative Mary Stuart Guile had a fantastic commission. 10 years, she worked on this thing, she got everything was done. Unfortunately, before she retired, there was no repeal date on her legislation, so the new administration appointed someone to that. And that member wanted to get going again, but all the entire commission membership said, no, we're done. Our work here is completed. But the new member did not agree with that. And so that new member kept going from office to office, trying to get going. And finally, we scheduled the meeting, and everybody who attended the meeting said our work is done. But all the prep work that staff had to take to set that up was unfortunate. And you have, as Paul mentioned, that situation where there was a large appropriation that came in with the study commission. And within that legislation, it specifically said no legislative staff was to be involved in this study. That's why I was supposed to be completely out of here. Well, once the bill was passed and the sponsor. They came to legislative staff, the LBA, accounting, our office. I said, what do we do? So it says right here, we're not to do anything. Well, where do we go? What do we do? Well, that hadn't been all thought out on how do we do this. So that took a great deal of time, several offices, several days in trying to figure out how to proceed. We have, and I can go on, obviously, I have a lot of anecdotal stories I can tell you over the years I've dealt with all this. And as I mentioned, we had the 2010 study, and then all the 3 studies that Representative Ebel worked so hard on. And yet here we are explaining everything to you. And that's why I thought this was such a wonderful opportunity for staff, because you have to see, we can see all the numbers hanging there, but we all need to see what is the problem in the background, and how do you members solve it? Because what members, the culture has changed. When I came in '84, we had just gotten done with the Constitutional Convention, and we had just passed annual sessions. And one of the things that was stated, and I kept hearing it from everywhere, we're no longer going to have commissions. The standing committees will now study all these issues. And here we are. So, so that's something to consider. That was a goal back then. And then you can, a chair, one of my chairs had a 2-year study on special education, and it was fantastic, but it was ad hoc. The committee worked so hard, and they came out with 9 pieces of legislation, but the issue stayed in the committee, and they discussed it, and they worked within their committee. It was not assigned to a statutory that took it outside of the realm of the legislators, the ones who are elected to do this. And as Deborah also mentioned, we do run into a lot of members who are named to a commission, or it's a brand new commission, and they're first named and they're organizing, and yet another member wanted it to be studied, but wanted nothing to do with the issue. And as Dave mentioned, we've often said, and anecdotally, we've heard, because Mila, head of OLS research, we're best friends, so we work together all the time. And it's unfortunate that someone goes into drafting, they have an idea, they don't have time to do the research, so they say, well, let's create a commission. Well, it's unfortunate they didn't go in a month or 2 ahead of time, go in to see Mila and say, could your office please look this up for us? Or also even with our own committees, in the standing committees, if we created subcommittees I know we went very fast this session, but sometimes that's one of the great things about retained bills. You have more time to study, but it's being held within your committee, and it's the legislators who are in charge, not some outside group. And we do know, again, anecdotally, that there are outside groups, lobbying groups, advocacy groups who promote commissions with their own membership, because you have an opportunity to work on policy. And that's not a bad idea, because if you have a chaptered study, these people can come and talk before you. They don't have to be an appointment to the group. That's another thing members don't always understand, that you can have, say, a 5-member chaptered study and invite the 10 stakeholders and have them come in and meet with your group and come to every meeting, because what you're trying to do is share the information. And as I mentioned about Representative Mary Stuart Gile and also Representative Pat Abrami, they were real driving forces behind their study commissions. And when Representative Gile had retired, and obviously Representative Abrami left this past session, and their commissions, that drive is gone. And what happens is, who picks up the slack to push those studies? So that's been my experience and the experience of our office, but it's also is shared in that, as you've heard from every one of us here, it's not the issue of the study. A study is a study. It's the vehicle that you're using. And so that vehicle takes so much time and energy. Wouldn't it be better to have that time and energy devoted to analyzing whatever the issue may be, as opposed to trying to organize? So I hope that, at least from our perspective, or my perspective, I was able to share some of that with all of you. And that's it for me. Thank you. Oh, gosh, yes. Oh, my gosh. So I Representative Patusek stopped in. I said, come here.
I've seen that.
So anyway, those are all the studies since 1981. They're upstairs on the fourth floor. Lots and lots and lots of boxes. And that doesn't even include all the electronic studies, but that's where they go. And that's where you can find them. Thank you.
Paper.
All right. Thank you so much for your patience and listening to us. It's clearly very, we're all passionate about the subject matter. And we know it's a lot of information, but want to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Doctor. I have a couple of questions. I'll kick it off, and then I'll turn it over to the committee to ask what questions you have. Couple of things. Would it be appropriate, kind of picking up where Ann left off, as we look at the breadth of committee chairmanships across the legislature, that you look, you're a committee chair, you're in charge of the agricultural committee, whatever. Would it be appropriate to say that? Oh, and by the way, you have oversight of these 15 commissions, and you in finance, you have oversight of these 27 commissions, so that all the commissions could be split up by committee chair to provide oversight, to provide leadership, commentary, and so forth. Is that an option available to us, or is that a rules issue?
Well, the way we've been doing it now for the past couple of years and this year too, is that Deborah usually contacts the committee chair for recommendations, and contacts the Democratic office for recommendations, depending on how the commission is done. So in essence, they are kind of split up, not reality, but in essence, they are pretty much split up, because we are just having, and we've had, and I'm sure Speaker Sherrill have had the same problem. People want these things, but they don't want to serve on them. And that's why we have members, serving on multiple of ones, because they're the only ones that are willing to do it. And that's why these things have become such a problem, is that if we could split it up between all 400 members, that would take the load off the members that are serving, but it doesn't alleviate the problem of where they're going to meet and all the other things that go along with it. But it's getting out of hand, and I have full confidence that as a committee, you guys can fix it. I will tell you one thing, that I have made a decision that if the first name, the sponsor of a committee or a commission especially, is going to be put on that commission.
Mr. Chairman, just to address your direct question, though, the fact of the matter is, you ask about having oversight of those commissions. That the situation is, you can't. That the commissions are really autonomous. Yes, they rely on us somewhat, but at the end of the day, their recommendation, the report that they draft that might say we should sponsor a bill that does these 15 things, it's up to the legislative member to file that legislation. So again, it sounds great that we say to Representative Weiler, hey, these 15 commissions are under the purview of finance, but if Representative Weiler decides to go to those 15 commission meetings and give them what for, they can tell them exactly what for back.
And if I may share one way that chairs have been able to help in the past, Representative Rice and Senator Carson, working with staff, looked at a lot of their children and family related commissions and were able to consolidate some last term. So they took 2 or 3 and moved them into another commission, the Children Oversight Commission. So that was one way that they consolidated it, saying, hey, it's like subject matter, and we can move that into one commission.
Okay, question for the legal guys, and then I'll turn it over to the rest of the committee for questions. I know there are different, probably lower forms of government at the local level that deal with this problem of people not showing up or no quorum and so forth. And the way that they typically do it would be if you don't show up for a meeting 3 times in a row, you're off, you're gone, and it's up to the committee chair to reappoint somebody else or whoever the appointing authority is. The other part of that would be if the committee, we've heard about committee or commissions that don't achieve a quorum over and over again, that if the quorum's not achieved X number of times in a row, the committee is automatically, or the commission is disbanded. So would those be options that we could pursue as, you know, in our role on this special committee?
You could. You'd have to specify it in the statute, and I think this gets back to the issue of, so to borrow your example, say you had a excuse me, a standing committee or a chaptered committee, and you had a member of the House who consistently just didn't show up. The Speaker, within his authority, can replace that member. I mean, that's clear under our House rules. It's under our practice and precedent, and it's an easy process to do. Same thing with lack of quorum, because it's within our authority, within our body. When it's a statutory commission, and Paul hinted on this at this in response to your previous question, certainly I think there's some leeway to do that, but if it's not specified in the statute, that process for replacing members or lack of quorum or disbanding for lack of quorum, it's an open question. And so that's why I sort of the theme of my presentation was, in the absence of statutory authority, there's not as much guidance or oversight versus a standing committee or a chaptered committee or even an ad hoc. There's much more authority to do the types of things that you're suggesting.
Would that be some standard language you could advise us on, that when when a legislature comes to you and says, I want to create a commission, that you could advise them that one of the things that the Speaker would like to have is this standard language, and in that standard language would be, you know, the 3 meetings and you're out, or 3 lack of quorums and the commission is disbanded. I mean, is that something that we could put in place that the legislature may not be aware of, that you are a template to them, saying here's how to create a commission language?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could draft something. I'd want to think about how to do that, particularly in terms of if it's a legislative member versus a non-legislative member, because again, when you're creating a statutory commission, in many ways, you're ceding a certain level of legislative authority. And so you'd have to be very specific about, the consequences of any person missing 3 meetings, and then who can replace it, and potentially if there's a challenge to that. Say the person couldn't attend 3 meetings because they were sick. You'd have to be pretty clear, I think, on how you'd want to do it. I'm not suggesting you couldn't, but there are different considerations in commissions versus the other types of studies.
Thank you. I have some more questions, but I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Yeah, Karen, please.
Well, I have to say I have a little bit of PTSD just listening to all this. Because I think we all talked so much about all this stuff, and it's just phenomenal to see it all written down. And thank you very much for doing it. I just have a couple of comments, if that's all right, as
Sure.
opposed to questions. I guess one thing I'm not sure everyone is aware, but when you're talking about the numbers of commissions, I mean, my memory is that we had like 180 to 200 commissions. We just had an unbelievable number, and it required something in the vicinity of 300 appointments. So if you think of all the other work that's going on at the beginning of a term, to do all those appointments too is just kind of mind-blowing. There was just several things I just want to add to the conversation. So one is when Paul was talking about culture, one of the things is that it's really hard to get legislators to accept the fact that a chaptered study committee, a 5-person legislator-based committee can do work as well, if not better, as a commission that has, you know, a dozen to 24 members. That, I don't know if it's a status sort of concept, but you really, I mean, I've done it both ways. You can have a legislative study commission, and believe me, the people that are interested will show up every time. And you can make like working groups, and you can come up with really effective recommendations. And the legislators drive the process. I learned this from Anne. The legislators drive the process as opposed to everybody else. And it's much easier to get a quorum in those circumstances than with many of these commissions. Legislators just have to take a little bit of responsibility. The other thing is they want these appointees, as you folks described, but the legislators should be asking the people who they want to be on these commissions whether they even want to be. A lot of times they just don't. I mean, I remember the BIA had been appointed to like 10 committees and they just couldn't do it. And so, you know, just thinking about policy, the legislators have to take responsibility. The other thing is a lot of times freshmen legislators, that's one of they come and they want to do a commission or a committee, and they end up being the first main member, and they're the ones that take the most hand holding because they have absolutely no experience with doing it, and it just it makes things really complicated. The other thing I just want to say, and this is sort of a question, one thing that we learned going through it is, regardless of whether a Senate bill or a House bill created a study committee, the House Committee Services was really being expected to bear the laboring oar. And hopefully, at this point, it's been pretty clear now that if it's a Senate-created study committee, the Senate bears the laboring oar and not the House. Yeah, okay.
That is going to be reemphasized when we have a chairman's and a vice chairman's meeting, that if the Senate bill comes over and wants to have us be in charge of it, that is going to be an amendment to that commission before it's passed, that the Senate is the ones that are going to be in charge if it's a Senate commission.
Right, because it's not fair.
Yeah, it's not right, and maybe that'll stop them sending over commissions. I think we got 25 or 30 or something again this time in the bills. They sent over 172 bills, and there's got to be 25 or 30 commissions in there.
So just one other comment. As much as we dislike study committees and commissions, well run, they really do provide really good information. So one of the big impetuses, especially in the last study committee on committees that we did, is to try to make sure that if you're doing a commission or a committee, the information, the report gets to the people that should have it. And that, I mean, in my mind, was always committee chairs. That serves two purposes. One is they know that these committees exist, so they shouldn't be duplicating them. And the other thing is they have the benefit of the report. So I understand, like when Paul just said that sometimes it's not clear who the right person is to get that, but my fallback would be you just send it to both. But the point is, if we're going to go to all this effort, we just really have to get the information to the people that should have it so they can benefit from it. And the only other thing that we heard on several occasions was that people who are preparing these reports, there should be a little more specificity in the statute on what should be in the reports, because if they're producing reports, they should be useful. So that's just sort of my comments, but thank you ever so much for this.
Would you believe I read them all? But I want to make it clear. I'm not saying we should never pass any commissions or committees, anything else. I chaired the commission that set up the Moose Plate, and I mean, that was a lot of work too. But anyways, we had a number of different agencies and everything involved in that. So it's not to ban them, but if we're going to create them, let's make damn sure that they're doing something and that they actually meet and they actually accomplish something. Or, as you said, if there's one that's similar, then let's combine them.
I'm sorry.
Sure,
can I
sure.
just make-
Go
So,
ahead.
so the other problem, like with the committee on committees, we really couldn't take substantive action. So if you want to do the thing where you combine 3 or 4 committees that have similar topics, it's really hard to do that if you're not the policy committee. So that's just something, I don't know whether a committee of committees could make a recommendation or whatever, but it's really hard if you're not the policy committee, I think, to take a substantive position on a policy matter. Just what I think.
Thank you. Who else on the committee would like to speak? Yes, Representative.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming and doing this presentation today. I've had a lot of things on my mind, and one of the things I thought back on is when we had the Right to Know Commission. It was a very large one, and I don't remember the details of it, but I do remember there was a terrible, terrible problem getting a quorum to do anything. And that commission, because they couldn't get anything done, decided to have legislation filed so they could continue the commission, on which they did nothing. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be critical, but that's what happened. And I sat on the committee, which they reported to Judiciary, and they came back finally with a piece of legislation that made no sense and said, we know it makes no sense, but we are required to file something. What do we do with a commission that's not getting anything done? I don't remember how that commission dissolved. I don't remember what happened. But is there some system we can have in place if a quorum can't be brought together, or if a commission can't accomplish anything? Is there something we can do to stop a commission besides having a sunsetting provision?
I think you just laid out one of your charges.
Okay, thank you. And also made me stop and think about some other processes in terms of people sponsoring. I do know of one member, won't speak of who it is, who is very proud of serving on 14 different commissions. How does one extend himself or herself to serve on so many? And how does work get done when there are so many commissions that, again, seem to be duplicative or similar to each other, but not quite duplicative? What can we do?
Well, that again is one of the main problems, is that so small amount of members actually serve on so many different
Yeah.
committees and commissions, because it's the only ones we can get to do it. And I mean, as we say, Deborah calls the committee chairman and finds out, their recommendations, and then the phone calls have to be made. Are you willing to serve? And a vast majority of the time, members says, oh no, I'm too busy, I haven't got time, and, that kind of thing. So it comes down to a small amount of members serving on multiple committees. And I think that detracts from the ability of the committees to meet and actually present good solutions to whatever the committee was formed for.
Mr. Chairman, can I try to address this? This actually gets back to another point that Representative Ebel mentioned as well. I might suggest you as a committee invite the various committee chairs here so that they can share those duplicative commissions with you. Certainly Representative Ladd, who serves on 36 of those things, can talk about that with respect to education, and perhaps that can be the basis of legislation that you all put forward for next year. So it might be a good idea to consider bringing your colleagues in for those kind of conversations.
And are you suggesting a consolidation piece of legislation type of?
Well, I mean,
output?
that was just based off of the comments from Representative Wall and Representative Ebel being a policy decision. If you bring the policy committees together to make those decisions for you all to put in joint legislation on, that might be a good idea.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
one other comment or question. I've been on committees before, one in particular where we discouraged members from filing bills for commissions and explained that we were taking people away from the state agencies and departments where they needed to do their work and spending too much time over here. That's why we would have a study committee so they could come and be reference people but not serve on the commission as members. I agree with the fact that we ought to have the leadership of the committees talking with the members about all this, but I think also it would be very helpful during orientation. A lot of new members come in and are going to change the world, and I respect that to some extent. But all of a sudden, we see a lot of commissions and committees set up, and I don't think we are explaining that well enough to new members. They don't understand the amount of time and responsibility it takes to serve on these. Just a comment. Thank you.
Sure, I
Sounds like a recommendation to me.
I don't want to impugn anyone's intentions, but I think I have seen where somebody comes in with the world on a pin and wanting to change it, and they get into their committee and it's not going well. So rather than let the proposed bill die, they convince their colleagues to study it and study it on a commission or whatever to say, and just to keep it alive. And that unfortunately happens too often. Anybody else want to jump in or has a thought? Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've sort of jotted down a number of bullet points that I think are potential courses of action. And I guess I just wanted to go through those and hear from anybody who's interested in chiming in, sort of, am I on the right track? Is this kind of complete list, or is there anything else here? So I think some of what I heard was, obviously we could repeal or consolidate some of these. That would be introducing new legislation. We could promote standardization of some of the language around these, any future committees or commissions that get established. Also editing the enabling language in RSA 1449 to perhaps incorporate some automatic sunsets, some provisions that would sort of automatically sunset some of these things. Educate standing committees and committee chairs about the possibility of studying some of these as a standing committee rather than creating another committee. And then in line with the comment that was just made, I think educating new members, but to some extent, perhaps existing members as well. It's people want to be nice. I don't want to kill your bill. It's a study committee. Yeah, I can vote for that. And so I think it's a classic example of where we're looking at the benefits, but we're not looking at the costs. And so I almost feel like we need a summary of what has been discussed so far in the room today, that we give to every committee chair, and we say, before at the beginning of the exec session on any bill that creates a standing committee, read through these challenges that we experience as a result of having too many of these. So that was kind of my list of notes as I've been listening today, and I'm just curious to hear whether is there anything else that we should add to that? Is there anything on there that doesn't belong on there? Just looking for thoughts.
Thank you. Anybody else? What we're going to do soon here is talk about our follow-on meetings for our committee here, and what the schedule might look like, and take a lunch break here in a few minutes and come back in about an hour or so. Any further comments from the panel? Yes.
Thank you, Representative Dolan. One of the things I want to mention, in the material that we're going to hand out to you later, we do have a list of when we try to create consistent language in the drafting of some of these bills. So for instance, we used to have committee reports that could come in on any day, and then we decide November 1 was the best day because it was right before the election. But this was had been an agreement, I think, in 1995 by the Speaker and the Senate President. And also, reports could go anywhere. And at that point in time is when it was listed, the Speaker, the Senate President, the Governor, the two clerks, and the State Library. So we have had, and in the material we'll hand out to you, we have the not only the list of the legislative initiatives, but just the general initiatives by practice or agreement on how we could shape some of these things. So at least you'll have some historical perspective on how to move forward and hopefully coming up with suggestions on how we could possibly recommend to the drafters, if we could be consistent in this language, it could help everyone to understand. I have to add this one piece though, even though we came up with that November 1 deadline, then eventually, years later, because you don't have the same administration, some in the Senate changed it to December 1, and then it did cause a problem or January 1, and did cause a problem that we had before, but that's only been in a few instances. It hasn't been a big problem, but I just wanted you to know that that exists, and you'll be able to see that list laid out.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, great. Please take us.
So sorry. So we have a few next steps that we wanted to touch on before we part. First of all, staff is going to continue to meet and work on some of the improvement opportunities that we've been focused on. One being data cleanup and some type of IT solution so we can get rid of our multiple spreadsheets and have all of the data available to legislators and staff. So we are working on that. In your binder, when you receive your binder at the end, there is a draft list of commissions. Just so you know, we put that together just for your purposes. So we consolidated mine and House Committee Services and the Senate and created one for you. We do have a lot more columns in our own spreadsheets, but we tried to include name, RSA, and then if the commission is meeting. We've been talking about continuing ed opportunities to help educate legislators on the commissions and some of our challenges as well. That's something we expect that we'll work with you on. And then a potential, cheat sheet or trifold of commission guidelines, just, before somebody files legislation, because by the time they get to OLS, as Dave mentioned, we're too late sometimes. So if we can get some guidelines in front of legislators as soon as possible. And now we can give you your binders before you part for lunch, and just want you to know that we are here. This is important to all of us. So if you need us, please reach out to any of us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. We have at our disposal room 104 on the first floor, which is right next to the guard desk, and with the kiosk, mileage kiosk on the right-hand side as you come in the back door. What I'm thinking is that you may not want to drag these binders around with you everywhere you go. Like I know John will. He's crazy for binders, but if you want to store them in room 104 in the back room, there's room to do that. I would make sure you put your name on it or one of your business cards in it, so you know whose is whose. And we'll be able to reference that at our meetings, and you won't have to drag it with you from home every time you come to one of these meetings. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about before we go to lunch, just a quick question. David, are you Attorney Alocanis?
No,
No.
no, I am not.
Okay, I just want to get the titles right. You mentioned that 45 bills came in that created or adjusted commissions in the most recent session. Can you give us a breakdown where they come from, the Senate or the House, or?
I can't, then that information is about 2 weeks old now. I'd have to do more research on that because as you heard from Deborah, I literally have to search by the term commission, committee,
Right.
to get a list, and then, so I'd have to do additional research.
One last question before lunch is, we talked about many commissions are being attached to executive staff for follow-up. Does that have a governor's implication or to
Mr. Chairman, that's part of the Senate Bill 84 provision that is now before the House in legislative administration. And I would just note that Representative Sheehan and Representative Wall are both on legislative administration, and that bill has been scheduled for a public hearing. And I'm sure that you will expect a couple of us to be there testifying.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, well, with that being said, why don't we break for lunch and be back here at 1 o'clock? And we'll finish up and decide some of the methodology going forward of how we're gonna kind of slice this up and try to digest these big bites of information that we have in front of us. And I'll rely on Representative Evil to help us, because she's been through this before and been tortured once or twice already, so. With that, thank you all for coming. It's been very helpful and very educational. We'll see you at 1 o'clock. Get a huge All right, if you guys could break out your calendars and let's do a calendar check of when we think it's the least painful for us to meet going forward. I'm cognizant of the April vacation, which is the 24th to the 28th. We'll try to block that out. And just in general, how do you feel about which day of the week you want to meet? You like Mondays? You like Fridays? Someone said they didn't like Friday. No Fridays.
No Friday.
Monday's good for you.
Transportation still meets on Tuesdays, but we'll be meeting these times still.
Okay, so Monday seems like the least disruptive. Monday mornings or afternoons or either one? You like mornings
I'll
better?
be late.
Sorry?
I'll be late.
Oh,
I have first Monday of every month, I have an appointment. So other than that, I'll be here. And
I was thinking that the way we might attack this is the way a regular committee would attack things like this with subcommittees. Maybe what we do is we get the list of all the different commissions. We cut them up into groups, and then a subcommittee could attack these 20 commissions, another one could attack these 20 and then we come back together and reveal what we've decided or learned during that subcommittee activity. The other thing is maybe a subcommittee to attack process. You know, what's the right way? What's the language that ought to be in that goes to OLS as a standard template? When a legislature brings forth an idea to create a commission or a committee to OLS should be able to pull out of their bag of tricks. Well, here's the template that we want you to use, that we'd like you to use for that, and that would steer the legislator in a certain direction, hopefully with the help of their caucus, the office, and as well as the committee chair. Say, if you're going to do that in this committee or in this caucus, we'd like you to kind of go in this direction without tying their hands, but at least encouraging certain behaviors or certain activities. So that might be a subcommittee on, on language and process, and a couple other subcommittees on commissions themselves. And I think what I'd like to say, and forgive the use of language, but there are certain sacred cows that we're going to run into, I think, in this process. And it's my thought that we have enough of a huge elephant to attack that I think we can skip the sacred cows, push them aside, and leave them alone, and we'll still have plenty to do. So if some of us individually or collectively, based on inputs from our respective caucuses, saying this is a very important commission that needs to keep going or needs to be supported or needs to be encouraged, then let's just take a hands-off approach to it and treat it as a sacred cow, saying that's important to the Democratic caucus or the Republican caucus or whatever, so we're not going to mess with it. We have 400 opportunities that we're probably not going to get too deep into that as it is. So my thought is, let's attack those things that we can come to easy agreement on, and not fight about the ones that are so-called sacred cows that we want to encourage to continue.
do the low-hanging fruit first.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
It would be helpful at the very beginning to put a stated purpose, to define what a commission is and the study committee is, and why we would prefer study committees if needed over commissions, because commissions take the agency and department heads and employees out of their jobs.
Yep.
And it slows down their work. And most members have no clue that that's what a commission does by getting all the, I remember when there was a particular chairman of, resources who would have commissions that she would have in her committee, and she would have people from BPS day after day after day, and they couldn't get any work done, and it was causing conflicts over BPS. So we need a good working relationship with our agencies and departments. And so, with the study committee, those people can come in and testify, but they don't have to sit there for everything all the time as they would on a commission.
Okay, so, what we can do is, well, let's do some easy stuff first. Let's look, while your calendars are open, let's pick our next meeting time. You think this same time next week is good? Next Monday? You want to do Monday morning?
I think once we get
Yeah.
do that, I'll leave 2 hours ahead instead of an hour. and a half. Go 32 miles.
You want to go 10 to
You can't
12, or
pass on Route 4, Matt.
I know.
you want to go 10 to 12, or 9 to 12, or what do you think?
I think at lunch there was an agreement, an informal agreement that somebody wanted 10. I don't care.
You go with 10 or 9? 10?
Well, I'll be late anyway.
Yes, ma'am.
10 is better, usually we have a bunch of beginning of the week things. we
Okay.
get through at 9.
How about, would 10 to 1 be okay? That kind of jumps into the middle of lunch, but if we just said that we'd end it,
And not break for lunch and have to come back, so that's
Okay.
fine.
What if we did 9?
All right, I'll be here. I'll be here late, but it's 10 to 1 sounds good.
all right. 10 to 1. All right, so, and that next meeting would be
17th.
Monday, the 17th.
And then we won't meet till
Yeah, the next week we'll be off. And then May 1st,
May Day.
is that a bad day for you?
It's a week after the 17th.
It's,
That's
it's
school
a
vacation
school
week.
vacation week.
We have children in school.
We'll be out of town. For other people, other reasons.
All right. Well, you think about May 1st. If you can't make it, you can't make it. It's okay. Okay. Well, we won't count on you May 1st.
I will, you know what, I'm going to arrange something, but I'll let you know by tomorrow.
Sure, that's fine.
It's always 10 to 1.
Yeah, let's go 10 to 1. Unless if someone wants to change that to 9 to 12 or 10 to 12. A lot of this, if we're going to be off in subcommittee formats, I mean, you could do a meeting on a Wednesday with 2 other people on electronically or half and half. I don't think we're gonna have any restriction whether we do. You don't like electronic meetings?
I don't either. I don't Zoom.
No Zoom subcommittees? You think that's what the rule is? I know he hates the Zoom meetings,
I
but
do too. Well, subcommittees can meet,
you don't.
because we don't have to announce a subcommittee.
Right, subcommittees you
We can
can
meet anytime.
you can
Who's on it, they can
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
figure out what day we want to meet.
whoever the subcommittee chair is, you can decide how you want to meet or where you want to meet, whether you want to meet at a local restaurant or at
think-
McDonald's or here or whatever.
I think the subcommittees do need to be noticed.
You think so?
No, committees do.
Yeah.
All right, I'll find out.
Yeah, I think they do. But we can figure it out.
Yeah.
As a subcommittee and we don't have to meet on the same day as the committee.
Correct. But those subcommittee meetings
Yeah, I
do
think,
need to
yeah,
be
they
noticed
do.
in the
Yeah,
calendar.
you're right, they do. I had a
Alright.
brain fart.
I mean, I like the idea of meeting at a restaurant. but-
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, we don't
Or
have
on
to,
Zoom.
we
I
can
like
meet
that.
off-site.
Yeah, I'm personally gonna be in Spain the week of May 8th. So that's it.
Let's meet in Ibzia.
Right, so, and I'm not gonna zoom in from Spain.
Tormelinas. Hey, I did TDYs to Terrahone.
But I do have a vice chair, and he can chair for me if that happens, if that's a conflict. So let's just plan on the next 3 meetings. 4/17, 5/1, and 5/8. Is that reasonable? And that'll be from 10 to 1.
In 104.
Right, in room 104. Do you guys all know what 104 is?
Yes,
Yeah,
behind the.
right behind the
guard's
kiosk.
desk.
And it's a much smaller room than this.
Yeah.
So that's why we didn't have it there today, because with the panel we had, we wouldn't have had enough room. And in the back of the room, there's places for you to put your stuff, your notebooks or anything, any paraphernalia you want to come and leave it in there, because it.
Usually locked, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Can you assure us it will be unlocked?
Well, I'll either assure that it's unlocked or the vice chair will, and it all in a panic mode, the guard that's sitting at that desk can come around and unlock it. I've asked for a special key for myself, but I haven't got it yet. So, but the guard's not too far away to unlock it. And then we'll see how that goes, and then we'll see how we want to continue our dates after that. Makes sense. And at the next meeting, our agenda, informal agenda for our meeting on the 17th. Let's see. Yeah, on the 17th.
Yeah.
Will be to decide how we want to split up into subcommittees. What makes sense? If you have a certain hunger for process or whatever, and you want to work on the process part of this with OLS, that would draw you in that direction. Or if you decide I just want to get after the commissions themselves, you can do that too. So I would ask you to come prepared to decide, this is what I want to volunteer for.
I think, Mr. Chairman, the committee needs a sense of specifically what we need to be covering so we can decide.
Well, part of that, I'm hoping that you'll help with, given your experience and Karen Ebel's experience. Things like what is help with definitions? What is a commission? What is a study committee? What is a full committee? And lay that out so that not only we'll be on the same sheet of music, but it's maybe something that we could provide to new freshmen as an education primer.
You want that for the next meeting?
Yeah, I think that would be good. Well, at least think about it so that you can decide, if you want to be on a process subcommittee, that would be something you certainly would take on. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Perfect. Oh, yeah, I see it.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna have to go take this home and read it. What a concept. This is your homework.
Well, I think with that also, it just brought to mind, we ought to all read and study a little bit RSA 1449. So we know what that says, because that's kind of the governing rules for how these things should behave. And plus we got Senate Bill, was it 84 that's coming up?
Yeah.
I don't
SB
think
84.
I don't think we need to study that so much.
No, we're gonna hijack that anyway.
But one of the thoughts about how we go forward that. And John, why don't you mention what your thought was on that?
On what, 84?
Yeah.
All right, what I was thinking, and I kind of mentioned it to the speaker as we were walking to lunch, is SB 84 is in your committee. And to retain it for now, and then we, as a committee, put a new SB 84 together with all the things that come out of our commission right here, out of our committee, oh my God, commission. And what we want to see in 84, basically gut it and rebuild it the way we want to see it, because we can't. I mean, Senate hijacks our bills, so turnabout's fair play.
I haven't seen SB 84 yet.
Okay, well,
We might want to just deal with that and then do our own clean bill.
yeah, or,
Yeah, so the immediate action would be to convince the chair and the committee members to retain SB 84, so that give us an opportunity to play with it rather than just pass it or kill it.
it comes out of the Senate, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know who the sponsors are.
Or,
Well,
like you said, just,
Janet's the ranking member of the ledge admin.
Well, you're the ranking member, right?
Or ledge admin.
So another task for you, take a look at that and find out who the sponsors are and what needs, what's the likelihood of them voting to retain? And then we also can get the
who's who's
speaker
chair,
working
Ledge?
on it too.
Who's chair?
Oh, all right.
Greg? That's a piece of cake.
So you and
That's a
Greg
piece of cake.
need to marshal that over to a
Yeah, they could-
retain motion.
They can retain it easy. She got 3 members right there. I'm sure I can convince Greg to retain it.
I used to chair, but I don't anymore.
Yeah, but I think for us all to look into it and then be able to talk about it,
Right.
Yeah,
next time we meet.
yeah, 'cause that's what we're trying to do, is figure out what we want to do. And next meeting, we can talk about it, having
So-
done a little bit of research.
So, so I'd like to ask you also take a look at your calendars again. So when we come back again on the 17th, you come back with what the dates going forward are. I hope we're not working over the summer, but at least just look at the calendar taking us into June. Let's, look at it to the end of the session, when we would normally end the
End of
session.
June.
End of June. So between now and the end of June, are there any dates that are bad for you that you'd like to exclude from consideration?
Oh.
Otherwise, we'll stay on this Monday track.
Memorial Day is not going to work,
Well,
'cause that's a Monday
right, so
by default.
that's another one.
Mr. Representative Dolan, I was wondering, when you're talking about the subcommittees possibly to be thinking ahead for next week, so you're imagining like a process-based subcommittee, as you were talking about, and then you want us to be thinking about, for the other committees, taking 20 existing commission and basically vetting them for where there's overlap, where there's redundancies, is that what it?
Unless there's a
just
better
try-
way, yeah, that's.
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure I understood, because
Yeah.
where I want to think about putting my energy for those, so, okay.
Yeah, we're making our own rules.
Yeah.
And then we can figure out how we want to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and like I said, I'd like to, and I think it's okay for us to identify those so-called sacred cows and put a fence around them. And let's just, this one, this one's really important to Matt, and he's got to have this commission, and he really wants it to go forward, and we need to work on it. So let's not mess with it. Let's
I like the idea of a template or a checklist kind of, going forward, if someone's considering requesting, that, so, you should have a sunset date in there, or you should have a number of members, you should, so the guardrails that we want people to think about
Yeah.
Right,
in
and-
place would be really helpful, I think.
Right,
to a
and
lot of members.
I know it didn't get a good read from the panel, but I'm not ready to let go of the thought also of putting a little more responsibility on committee chairs, to say, if we took the commissions and mapped them all into committee chairs and said, you're a committee chair, you get these 27 commissions, and you need to look over the shoulder of these commissions and decide You know, are they going in the right direction? Do they need help? Do they need to be killed or to be encouraged or whatever the action is? That I think, personally, I think we let the chairs off too easily on those commissions.
Well, it sounds like, yes, at the end of the day, they can't necessarily, strike anything down or whatever, but to just sort of have the oversight or the guidance, someone following up with these, you're saying where things stand or
Well, maybe
whether we should even be going forward with
even
them.
in the process mentality.
Yeah.
That if the members of a committee want a commission
Mhm.
or are considering a bill and they're thinking about tipping it in the direction of a committee or commission, that the chair should have some guidance for them,
Mhm.
saying,
Yeah.
you know, we really don't want to add another commission. Let's see if we can work it out
Mhm.
with a subcommittee right here and
Mhm.
now, and not add it to the bureaucracy of a commission.
I feel like at first, sorry, that's one last thought.
Mhm.
I feel like at first blush, it doesn't seem unreasonable to you to, request if somebody decides their bill's not going to get through and they're going to ask for a commission, that they have to serve on that commission
Right.
potentially. I know that came up for discussion, or that even just the study committee. And I also wonder, as I guess I'm probably the newest legislator at this table, I imagine if newer elected reps understood that they might be expected to serve on committees or commissions. I don't think that's entirely clear or expected right now, and that might give people
Right.
reason to think more.
I think
deeply about
expectations
it.
are important.
Yeah.
And Matt, we'll go to you next. The fact that, we'll go to you now. I really lost my train of thought.
That's okay. So I think when we talk about the chair's, authority to be able to establish a subcommittee or a working group or whatever it is within the committee structure, I like that a lot. I also am concerned about some issues actually getting, the chair to sign off on it and say, yes, this is something that's important. So I think as we think about, I'm really looking out for my friends on the other side of the aisle, because I know you'll be in the minority in 2024. And so just how do we retain the ability, right, for the minority?
This has to be non-political.
That's exactly it.
Well-
And so it's like, so is it thinking about the ranking member and their ability to, say, hey, this is something that, should get some attention, but we don't need to create a study committee or a study commission on this. That could be helpful. I also think, and I mentioned this to the speaker in the hallway earlier, it could be that, I don't know what the mechanism would be. It could be a resolution that the House passes, because it may not get the majority of folks on that committee to say, yes, this is important, but they could get the votes on the floor of the House.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a resolution to say, hey, we're going to ask the Education Committee to study, higher ed, some particular topic, and then that's the voice of the entire chamber saying, yes, this is something that should be followed up on. There should be action taken to study it.
Great idea, yeah. Okay, that's good.
Sounds good.
Any input from our assistants?
Cool.
Yes. How about 84 and 1449? It's in the binder, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it looked like
Yeah,
we were just looking at the
here it is.
hearing schedule, and I think 84. That was the Senate hearing. Great. Okay. So it hasn't been scheduled yet in Ledge Admin. Next week. Okay. Great.
Do you know, do you have the date and time? It's not on the website yet. Which day? Okay, great. Thank
On
you.
the House calendar. It's already been heard in the Senate?
It passed.
He passed it over to us.
Oh, it's passed over.
It got crossed over.
Got it.
All right.
Anything else? Any other further business that we want to talk to while we're here? Otherwise, we'll see you all on Monday. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get Doucette here, he's missing. And I think Karen will be back too. Karen told me ahead of time she couldn't make it this afternoon.